I arrived late at the restaurant for dinner with our friends and approached the table without my fiancé noticing me. He was saying I do not want to marry her anymore. She is far too pathetic for me. Everyone was laughing at the situation as I took off the ring, but the smiles disappeared when I revealed one detail. Before I tell you how I humbled him and his entire family, in under 10 minutes, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the very people you were supporting. The Gilded Cage was the kind of Atlanta establishment that charged $20 for water and required a reservation 3 months in advance. The valet sneered at my dust-covered Honda Civic as I pulled up to the curb, sandwiched between a Bentley and the G-Wagon I knew my fiancé Dante had driven here. I tossed the keys to the valet, ignoring his judgment. He had no idea that the tip I would give him later would be more than his weekly salary. I smoothed down my simple linen trousers and checked my reflection in the glass doors. I looked exactly like what I was supposed to be, a tired archivist coming from a long shift at the downtown library. I did not look like the owner of Legacy Holdings or the landlord of this very building. I was 15 minutes late. A water main had burst at one of my commercial properties in Buckhead, and I had to personally approve the emergency contractor because my site manager was out sick. I walked through the heavy oak doors, the air conditioning instantly cooling the sweat on my neck. The hostess tried to stop me, her eyes scanning my plain t-shirt and work boots, but I breezed past her, spotting the loud table in the center of the room. There they were. My fiancé Dante, looking impeccable in a suit I bought him. His brother Trey looking bored. And Trey's wife Becky, a woman who treated being white in a wealthy black social circle like a competitive sport. She was swirling a glass of wine that cost more than my car payment. I was about to wave to get their attention when Dante's voice carried over the ambient jazz music, loud and performative. I am telling you, Trey, I cannot do it anymore. I am calling it off tonight. I froze behind a large decorative fern. Trey mumbled something about the wedding being 2 weeks away, but Dante waved a hand dismissively. It does not matter. Look at her life, Trey. She is a librarian. She makes $40,000 a year. She drives a rust bucket. I am a CEO now. I need a woman who elevates me, not a charity case I have to drag along. Crystal is flying in from Miami tomorrow. Now that is the kind of woman who belongs on my arm. Becky let out a shrill, cruel laugh that made my blood boil. Finally, you came to your senses, Dante. I have been telling you for 3 years. Simone is nice enough, I guess, in a homely sort of way, but she does not fit the aesthetic. She looks like the help, not the lady of the house. We have an image to maintain. I stood there, gripping my motorcycle helmet, my knuckles turning white. They were drinking my wine, eating in my building, and driving a car paid for by my shell company, all while laughing at my expense. Dante leaned back, soaking in the validation. She is just pathetic, honestly. No ambition, no drive. She is lucky I even looked at her. That was the moment the last thread of my patience snapped. I did not feel sadness. I did not feel the heartbreak of a woman about to lose her fiancé. I felt the cold clinical clarity of a business owner, realizing she needed to liquidate a bad asset. I took a deep breath, walked out from behind the fern, and stepped directly up to the table. I slammed my helmet onto the pristine white tablecloth right next to the breadbasket, causing the silver cutlery to rattle against the fine china. The sudden clatter cut through their laughter like a knife, severing the air of exclusivity they had built around themselves. Trey choked on his scotch, his eyes bulging as he looked up at me. Becky froze, her mouth hanging open mid-insult, her hand gripping the stem of her wineglass so hard her knuckles turned white. But Dante did not even flinch. He just looked up at me with that arrogant, heavy-lidded smirk I used to mistake for confidence, and took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink. "You are late," he said without standing up or offering a chair. "And you look like you just crawled out of a sewer." I stared at him, waiting for the panic or the excuses, but none came. There was no guilt in his eyes, only a cold, calculated malice. Instead of lowering his voice, he leaned back in his leather chair, spreading his arms as if welcoming an audience. "Actually, this is perfect timing," he announced to the table, his voice booming so the diners 3 tables away could hear clearly. "I was just telling everyone that I am done, Simone. I am done dragging dead weight around." He looked me up and down, his lip curling in genuine disgust as he took in my construction dust-covered boots and my simple linen shirt. "Look at you," he sneered. "You are almost 30 years old, and you are still playing dress-up in thrift store rags while I am out here building an empire." The humiliation was designed to be public. He wanted to break me in front of the people he was trying to impress. "I am a CEO, Simone," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "I am the future of tech in Atlanta. I need a queen by my side, not a pathetic librarian who counts pennies and smells like old books and failure. Crystal is flying in tomorrow. Now she understands the assignment. She is a model. She has a brand. She has 2 million followers. You have a bus pass and a Honda that sounds like a lawnmower. You are a burden, Simone. You are a financial and social anchor around my neck, and I am ready to fly." I felt the eyes of the entire restaurant burning into my back, but I refused to shrink. I stood taller, my spine straightening as the silence stretched. Before I could respond, Becky chimed in, her voice shrill and eager to join the attack. "Oh, honey, do not look so shocked," she said, swirling her expensive wine. "We have all been trying to tell Dante for months. You just do not fit in with us. I mean, look at that outfit. Is that polyester? It is honestly embarrassing to be seen with you in a place like the Gilded Cage. You look like the help, not the fiancé." She laughed and looked around the table for approval, enjoying her moment of cruelty. "You really should have known better than to think you could keep a man like Dante. He is high class and you are just plain." A younger version of me would have cried. She would have run out of the restaurant in tears, begging for forgiveness for not being enough. But the woman standing there had just secured a multi-million-dollar mixed-use development deal 3 hours ago while wearing those work boots. I looked at the ring on my finger, the cheap stone he had sworn was a diamond, back when I was too in love to verify it. The anger that had been simmering in my gut for months finally boiled over, but it did not explode. It turned into ice. I looked from Becky's smug face to Dante's arrogant grin and realized they truly believed they were the powerful ones in this equation. They thought they were discarding trash, not realizing they were setting fire to their only safety net. I did not shed a single tear. Crying would imply I felt loss, and right now all I felt was the lifting of a heavy burden I had carried for 3 years. I looked down at my hand at the engagement ring Dante had given me. He had sworn it was a vintage diamond from an estate sale, but I knew better. It was a cloudy cubic zirconia he likely picked up at a pawn shop for less than the cost of the appetizers on their table. It was cheap, fake, and lackluster, just like the man sitting in front of me. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the ring off my finger. The metal felt cold against my skin, but my hands were steady. Becky was still smirking, raising her glass of vintage Cabernet specifically chosen to pair with her entitlement. I held the ring over her glass for a split second, letting the light catch the dull stone. Then I dropped it. The splash was satisfyingly loud. Dark red wine erupted from the glass like a mini volcano, spraying across the pristine white tablecloth and coating the front of Becky's ivory designer dress. She shrieked, jumping up from her chair and frantically dabbing at the spreading crimson stain with a linen napkin. "You ruined my dress!" she screamed, her face contorting into a mask of pure rage. "That is silk, you idiot! Do you have any idea how much this cost?" I ignored her completely, turning my gaze back to Dante, who was staring at the wine glass with a mixture of shock and amusement. "You do not have to wait until tonight," I said, my voice low and even, cutting through Becky's hysterics. "We are done, Dante. I am finished funding your lifestyle, and I am finished pretending you are anything other than an insecure little boy playing dress-up in a man's suit. Consider the ring a parting gift. It is worth about as much as your promises. I grabbed my helmet off the table, ready to turn away. Dante let out a short, barking laugh, shaking his head, as if I had just told a particularly funny joke. He leaned back in his chair, unbothered by the chaos I had caused, or his sister-in-law's ruined dress. "Oh, look at you trying to be hard," he scoffed, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You really think you can walk away from me, Simone? You are trying to act like you have options, but we both know the truth. You will be back before I even finish my steak. You have nowhere else to go. Who else is going to want a dusty librarian with zero prospects? Go cool off in your little Honda. When you realize you cannot pay rent next month without my presence giving your life meaning, you can come back and beg. Maybe if you apologize nicely, I will let you keep the apartment while I move Crystal in. You are just throwing a tantrum because you know you lost the best thing that ever happened to you." I paused with my hand resting on the back of his chair. He sat there radiating arrogance, entirely convinced of his superiority and my insignificance. It was almost a shame to ruin his moment so quickly, but I had a schedule to keep, and patience was a luxury I could no longer afford. I leaned down until my lips were inches from his ear, invading his personal space in a way that made him flinch. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp scent of the spilled wine soaking into the tablecloth. "You are right about one thing, Dante," I whispered, my voice soft enough that only he could hear but hard as steel. "I do not belong at this table. But you are wrong about why. You see, I am not a guest here. I am the landlord." He frowned, pulling back slightly to look at me, his confusion evident in the furrow of his brow. He opened his mouth to speak, but I did not give him the chance. I straightened up and adjusted my helmet under my arm, looking down at him one last time. "Enjoy your dinner," I said loud enough for the rest of the table to hear. "It will be your last one here." With that, I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. I did not look back. I did not need to. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, but for the first time in years, the weight of their judgment did not crush me. It fueled me. As I pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the humid Atlanta air, I signaled to the general manager standing by the hostess podium. He was a tall white man with silver hair and an air of authority that usually made customers nervous. He nodded once at me, his expression respectful and serious. I watched through the glass as he straightened his suit jacket and picked up a black leather folio from his station. He marched across the dining room floor with a purpose that silenced the tables he passed. Inside, Dante was still laughing, shaking his head at my exit, probably making another joke about my mental state to reassure his guests. But his laughter died in his throat when the manager stopped directly at his table, casting a shadow over their meal. "Excuse me, sir," the manager said, his voice projecting clearly across the hushed room. "I am afraid I must ask you and your party to settle your tab and vacate the premises immediately." Dante looked up, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me." He sputtered, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "Do you know who I am? I am a VIP here." "I know exactly who you are, sir," the manager replied, his tone icy. "And I am acting on direct orders from the property owner. Legacy Holdings completed the acquisition of this building this morning. The new owner has reviewed the guest list and explicitly stated that your presence is no longer welcome in her establishment." Becky gasped, her hand flying to her wine-stained chest. "Her establishment. Who is the owner?" The manager placed the folio on the table, sliding a single sheet of paper toward Dante. It was a notice of trespass, effective immediately. "The owner is Ms. Simone," the manager said, delivering the final blow with professional detachment. "She has requested that you leave her property within 10 minutes, or she will have security escort you out. Also, she mentioned that your credit card on file has been declined, so you will need to provide an alternative form of payment for the wine damage and your meal." I watched from the curb as the color drained from Dante's face. He looked from the paper to the manager and then to the empty spot where I had been standing. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The pathetic librarian he had just discarded was the one holding the keys to the kingdom he was so desperate to enter. I put on my helmet, revved my engine, and pulled away, leaving him sitting in the wreckage of his own ego. This was just the beginning. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the private foyer of the penthouse. Dante stormed out first, his face a mask of twisted rage veins bulging in his neck. He was still fuming from the humiliation at the gilded cage, and he needed a win. He needed to re-establish his dominance, and he needed to do it now. Behind him trailed his entourage like a pack of hyenas smelling blood. His mother Verna adjusted her hat, looking around the hallway with a critical eye, sniffing as if the air itself was not up to her standards. Trey followed, carrying Becky's purse, while Becky dabbed uselessly at the wine stain on her dress, muttering curses under her breath. And clinging to Dante's arm was Crystal, the woman he had flown in to replace me. She looked around wide-eyed, taking in the marble floors and high ceilings, clearly calculating the net worth of her new upgrade. Dante jammed his key into the lock, turning it with unnecessary force. He threw the door open and marched into the living room, shouting my name. "Simone, get your ass out here right now!" He did not even wait for a response before turning to Crystal and gesturing grandly at the sprawling living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. "Welcome home, baby. I told you I lived in the sky. This is where real winners live, not in the dirt like that librarian." Crystal squealed, delighted, dropping her designer bags on my vintage velvet sofa. "Oh, Dante, it is gorgeous. It is so much better than the pictures." I was standing in this kitchen, calmly pouring myself a glass of water. I had not bothered to change out of my work clothes. I watched them pour into my sanctuary like a toxic oil spill. Dante saw me and charged forward, stopping just short of the kitchen island. "You are still here," he spat. "I thought you would have the decency to be gone by now after that stunt you pulled at the restaurant. You embarrassed me, Simone. You embarrassed my family. And now you are going to pay for it. Get your trash and get out. Tonight. Right now. I want you gone before Crystal unpacks her first bag." Verna stepped up beside him, crossing her arms over her chest. Her eyes raked over me, filled with the disdain she had harbored for 3 years. "You heard my son," she said, her voice sharp and nasally. "You never deserved to live in a place like this anyway. Look at you. You bring the property value down just by standing there. We tried to tell Dante you were not cut out for this life, but he has a big heart. He tried to save you. But you bit the hand that fed you, girl, and now you are on the street where you belong." Becky kicked off her heels, leaving them right in the middle of the floor. She walked over to the bookshelf, picking up a framed photo of us and tossing it face down. "Honestly, Dante, I do not know how you stood it this long," she sneered. "The energy in here is so heavy. Crystal will fix that, though. She has style. She knows how to keep a man happy." Crystal giggled, walking over to the balcony doors. "I am going to redecorate everything," she announced, turning to look at me with a pitying smile. "No offense, sweetie, but this whole beige aesthetic is just so boring. I need color. I need life." Dante walked over to her, wrapping his arms around her waist and kissing her neck loudly, making sure I watched. "See that, Simone," he said, looking back at me with triumph in his eyes. "That is what a real woman looks like in my house. Now stop staring and start packing. You are trespassing in my home." Verna did not stop at insults. She needed physical destruction to satisfy her rage. She marched past me into the master bedroom, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. I heard the sound of closet doors being thrown open, followed by the distinctive rustle of hangers being ripped from the rail. Moments later, she emerged carrying armfuls of my clothes. My vintage denim jackets, my silk blouses, even my work uniforms were bunched in her arms like garbage. With a grunt of exertion, she hurled them out the open front door into the public hallway of the building. "You are a liar!" she screamed, her face contorted with malice. "You think you can fool us with your little fairy tales about owning restaurants and buildings? We know what you are. You are a gold digger. You latched onto my son because you saw his potential and you wanted a free ride. You thought you could trick him into marrying you so you could get half of his empire, but we saw through you. You are nothing but a common thief trying to claim what belongs to Dante. She went back for another load, her movements frantic and chaotic. She grabbed my jewelry box from the dresser and dumped it upside down on the floor, kicking through the necklaces and earrings as if searching for something of value she could claim was stolen. Look at this junk, she spat, picking up a simple gold chain and tossing it aside. Cheap just like you. You probably spent all Dante's money on this trash while he was working himself to death. You should be in jail for fraud, claiming to be a landlord. You probably slept with the real owner to get them to kick us out. That is the only thing a woman like you is good for. Crystal watched this display with glee, her eyes lighting up as she realized the content potential. She whipped out her phone and tapped the screen, her face instantly transforming into a pouty, sympathetic mask for her audience. Hey guys, she chirped into the camera, aiming it first at herself and then panning over to where Verna was throwing my shoes into the corridor. You will not believe what is happening right now. We are at Dante's penthouse, and his crazy ex-girlfriend refuses to leave. She is literally delusional, you guys. She tried to ruin our dinner earlier by claiming she owned the restaurant. Can you believe that? Now she is squatting in his house and making his poor mother do all the heavy lifting to get her out. Becky laughed, leaning against the wall as she watched Crystal stream. Make sure you get her face, Crystal, she urged. The world needs to see what a desperate woman looks like. Crystal moved the phone closer to me, the ring light reflecting in her eyes. Say hi to the internet, Simone, she taunted. Everyone wants to know why you are so obsessed with a man who does not want you. It is embarrassing, sweetie. You are clinging to a lifestyle you cannot afford. Look at her, guys, she is just standing there while Dante's mom has to clean up her mess. #crazyex, #upgrade. I stood perfectly still watching Verna destroy my bedroom, and Crystal broadcast it to the world. They thought they were shaming me, but they were documenting their own crimes. Verna grabbed my laptop bag and looked ready to throw it too, but she paused, panting heavily from the exertion. Get out! She shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the door. Get out before I drag you out myself, you lying, manipulative parasite. You will not get another dime from my son. We are taking back everything you stole. I did not scream. I did not throw Verna's purse over the balcony, though the thought was tempting. Instead, I pulled my phone from my back pocket and dialed the number for the building's private security detail, adding a request for the Atlanta Police Department. My voice was calm, almost bored, as I reported a disturbance and trespassing at my residence. Verna was still panting from her exertions, screaming about how I was calling my goons, but I just leaned against the kitchen island and waited. Dante poured himself a drink, acting the part of the unbothered king, but I saw his hand shaking. He thought I was bluffing. He thought the police would take one look at his suit and my work boots and throw me out. He was about to learn that the law does not care about Armani. When the heavy knock came at the door 10 minutes later, Dante puffed up his chest like a rooster. He adjusted his tie, winked at Crystal, and marched over to open it, revealing 2 uniformed officers and the building's head of security, Mr. Henderson. Officer, thank God you are here, Dante announced, pointing a dramatic finger at me. We have a squatter situation. This woman is my ex-girlfriend. She refuses to leave my property and is harassing my mother. I want her removed immediately, and I want to file a restraining order. The older officer stepped inside, his eyes scanning the chaotic living room, the clothes strewn in the hallway, and Crystal still recording in the corner. Sir, is your name Dante? He asked, consulting a tablet. That is right, Dante replied, smirking at me. I am the resident of this penthouse. I have the paperwork right here. He jogged to the study and returned with a crisp folder, handing over a document with a flourish. It was a lease agreement I had printed for him 3 years ago, a prop to soothe his fragile ego, allowing him to pay $1 a month so he could feel like a provider. The officer took the document, examining it under the harsh foyer lights. He frowned, tapping something into his radio. This document is not notarized, sir, he noted, his voice flat. And the terms listed here are unusual. $1 a month for a 5,000 square foot penthouse in Buckhead. Dante laughed, a nervous sound that cracked in the middle. That is just an arrangement I have with the management. I am a VIP tenant. I pay the rest in consulting services. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, clearing his throat. Actually, sir, we have no record of any consulting services. The HOA fees and the mortgage for this unit were paid in full 6 months ago by the owner. Dante froze. Mortgage. I rent this place. The officer looked at his tablet again, scrolling through the property data. Sir, according to the Fulton County property records and the building registry, this unit is not a rental. It is owned outright by Legacy Holdings. Dante let out a sigh of relief. Exactly, Legacy Holdings. That is my company. He lied smoothly, though sweat was beading on his forehead. I own that LLC. It is my holding company. I forgot I moved the deed over. My accountant handles the details. The officer looked from the screen to me, his eyebrows raising. Ma'am, can you verify your identity? I stepped forward, handing him my driver's license and the articles of incorporation I kept digital copies of on my phone. The officer reviewed the documents in silence, the room holding its breath. He looked at Dante with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Sir, you are lying to a police officer. Legacy Holdings is a sole proprietorship. The registered agent and sole signatory is Simone. He turned back to Dante, his hand resting on his belt. This apartment belongs to this woman. The only person trespassing here is you. The officer did not raise his voice, but his tone left no room for negotiation. He told Dante he had exactly 60 minutes to remove his personal effects and vacate the premises, or he would be arrested for criminal trespassing. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Crystal's horrified gasp, as she looked down at her phone, where the likes on her new home tour were climbing by the second. She had just staked her entire online reputation on a lie I had allowed Dante to live, and now the foundation was crumbling beneath her 6-inch heels. Dante turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He lunged toward me, but the second officer stepped in smoothly, blocking his path with a hand on his chest. You forged this, he screamed, his spit flying. You used the library printers to fake a deed. I know you did. You do not have 2 nickels to rub together. You are a fraud, Simone, and I am going to sue you for everything you have. I am going to have you thrown in jail for identity theft and document forgery. You think you can steal my house with a piece of paper you printed off the internet? Crystal grabbed Dante's arm, her long nails digging into the fabric of his expensive suit jacket. Dante, stop screaming and fix this, she hissed, her voice rising an octave in panic. I just posted the view. I tagged the location. People are already commenting, asking for a housewarming party. I cannot delete it now. It will look like I am lying. We cannot leave Dante. You said this was yours. You said you owned the sky. She looked at the officer with pleading eyes, trying to use her influence. Officer, there has been a mistake. My fiancé owns this building. We cannot just pack up and leave in an hour. This is my home now. The officer was unmoved. Ma'am, you have 55 minutes remaining. I suggest you start packing unless you want your belongings impounded. The reality finally set in. The next hour was a chaotic symphony of humiliation. Verna was no longer throwing my clothes. She was frantically stuffing Dante's suits into garbage bags, the irony apparently lost on her. Becky was trying to unscrew a designer sconce from the wall, claiming she had bought it as a gift, until Mr. Henderson politely informed her that theft of fixtures would result in immediate arrest. Trey just sat on the floor looking defeated, while Crystal paced back and forth, deleting comments and blocking users trying to scrub her digital footprint before the truth came out. When the hour was up, they stood in the public hallway, surrounded by hastily packed bags and their own shattered egos. Dante pointed a shaking finger at me through the open doorway. You have not won anything, he threatened, his voice trembling with impotent rage. My lawyer will tear those fake documents apart. You will be hearing from us, Simone. I am going to expose you for the fraud you are. Enjoy your empty house while you can, because I am taking it back. I just smiled and closed the door, the heavy click of the lock, the the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I walked to the balcony and watched as they dragged their trash bags out to the curb, looking for a taxi because their ride was gone. The lobby of the building was a cold, stark contrast to the warmth of the penthouse they had just been evicted from. Dante marched through the automatic doors, his Italian leather loafers clicking angrily on the pavement. He was surrounded by his family, who looked more like refugees than royalty, clutching black garbage bags filled with designer suits and evening gowns. Verna was muttering about suing the police department, while Becky tried to shield her face from the doorman who was watching the spectacle with barely concealed amusement. Crystal trailed behind them, dragging her Louis Vuitton luggage across the concrete, the wheels making a harsh scraping sound that grated on everyone's nerves. Dante headed straight for the matte black G-Wagon, parked prominently in the circular driveway. It was his pride and joy, the physical manifestation of the lie he lived. He fished the keys from his pocket, pressing the unlock button with aggressive force. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, harder this time, jabbing his thumb into the fob. The car remained dark and silent. A flush crept up his neck, visible even under the streetlights. He tried the door handle, pulling it violently, but it was locked tight. "What is wrong with this thing?" he growled, kicking the tire. "I just had it serviced." "Open up, you piece of junk." Behind him, a low rumble grew into a roar as a massive flatbed tow truck pulled into the driveway, its orange warning lights flashing rhythmically, painting their humiliated faces in strobing amber. A team of 3 large men jumped out, wearing vests that read "Asset Recovery." They moved with practiced efficiency, bypassing Dante completely to surround the G-Wagon. One of them slapped a bright yellow sticker on the windshield, while another began attaching chains to the undercarriage. "Hey, get away from my truck!" Dante screamed, rushing toward them. "What do you think you are doing? That is a $200,000 vehicle. Get your hands off it right now!" The lead repo man, a guy with a thick beard and a clipboard, did not even look up from his paperwork. He just held up a hand, stopping Dante in his tracks. "Sir, step back. We have a repossession order for this vehicle due to default on payments. The lease has been terminated effective immediately." Becky let out a strangled noise of horror, looking around at the neighbors who had gathered on their balconies to watch the show. "Dante, this cannot be happening," she hissed. "You said you bought this car cash. You said it was paid off." Verna chimed in, clutching Trey's arm. "Tell them who you are, son. Tell them this is a mistake. They cannot just take your car. It is theft." Dante looked frantic, his eyes darting between the truck and his family. "There is a mistake," he stammered, his voice losing its thunder. "My accountant handles the payments. It is an auto draft. Call the bank." The repo man finally looked at him. "We did call the bank. The primary leaseholder canceled the authorization 3 hours ago. She listed the reason as unauthorized use by a non-payer." The realization hit the group like a physical wave. Simone. She had not just kicked them out of her house, she had stranded them on the sidewalk. As the winch whined and the G-Wagon was lifted into the air, tilting awkwardly like a beached whale, Crystal let out a sob. "My ride," she wailed. "How are we supposed to get to the Four Seasons in an Uber?" Dante watched helplessly as his status symbol was secured to the truck bed. He looked small, standing there amidst his garbage bags, the flashing lights illuminating his defeat. The crowd of onlookers whispered and pointed phones raised to capture the fall of the man who thought he owned the sky. The repo man checked his clipboard again, his face impassive under the flashing amber lights. "Actually, sir, the primary leaseholder is Ms. Simone. She has been making the monthly payments of $2,400 for the past 3 years. We received a notification at 4 p.m. today stating that she is no longer authorizing payments on a vehicle she does not possess. She requested immediate repossession to avoid liability." The words hung in the humid Atlanta air like heavy smog. Dante looked as if he had been slapped. The facade of the self-made tech mogul crumbled instantly, revealing the broke moocher underneath. Verna gasped, clutching her pearls, not for dramatic effect this time, but out of genuine shock. "You mean to tell me that girl was paying for this car?" she screeched, turning on her son. "You told me you bought it with your crypto earnings, Dante. You said you were rich." Dante stammered, trying to find a lie that would stick, but the tow truck engine roared to life, drowning him out. The G-Wagon, his symbol of masculinity and success, rolled away into the night, leaving an empty parking spot and a very full sidewalk of luggage. Crystal let out a dramatic wail, sitting down on her suitcase. "This is a nightmare," she sobbed. "My followers are going to see this. I am going to be a meme, Dante. You said you had it handled." Becky stepped forward, her face twisted in ugly rage. "That witch!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls of the lobby. "She did this on purpose. She planned this whole thing just to embarrass us. Who does that? Who pays for a car for 3 years just to take it away when they get dumped? It is sick, Dante. She is playing dirty. She is trying to ruin us because she is jealous of Crystal. She knows she cannot compete, so she is using her little library money to be petty." Trey looked at his phone, his face pale. "Uber XL is 15 minutes away," he muttered. "And it is going to cost $80 to get all this luggage to a hotel." "Do you have $80, Dante?" Dante patted his pockets, his face flushing a deep crimson. "My cards are in the car," he lied weakly, though everyone knew his cards would have declined anyway. Trey sighed and tapped his screen, paying for his own brother's ride of shame. The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in misery. The neighbors were still watching, some even bringing out wine to enjoy the show. When the beat-up minivan finally pulled up, it was a far cry from the luxury transport they were used to. The driver looked at the mountain of designer luggage and shook his head, refusing to help load it. I watched from the balcony above, a glass of wine in my hand, as my ex-fiancé struggled to shove his ego and his trash bags into the trunk of a minivan. As they drove away, cramped and arguing, I took a sip of the vintage Cabernet they had been drinking earlier. The car was gone, the apartment was mine, and Dante was about to find out that without my credit score, he was nothing but a man with a suit and a very big problem. Becky did not sleep that night in the cramped double-queen hotel room they were forced to share. While Dante snored loudly on the pull-out couch and Verna wept dramatically into her pillow, Becky sat in the bathroom, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light, tapping furiously on her laptop. She was a woman who wielded victimhood like a weapon, and she knew exactly where to strike. She logged into the exclusive Buckhead Ladies Forum, a private group with 50,000 members and a reputation for destroying local businesses and reputations before breakfast. Her fingers flew across the keys, weaving a tapestry of lies so intricate it was almost impressive. She titled the post, "Beware of the wolf in sheep's clothing, the librarian who stole my brother-in-law's life." In 1,200 words, she painted a picture of Dante as a trusting, successful entrepreneur who had been duped by a master manipulator. She claimed Simone was a mentally unstable stalker who had forged deeds, hacked bank accounts, and used identity theft to evict a loving family from their rightful home. She attached photos of the garbage bags on the curb, cropping out the repo truck to make it look like a sudden illegal eviction. She used words like financial abuse and narcissistic rage, knowing exactly which buzzwords would trigger the sympathy of the wealthy suburban mothers in the group. By 7 a.m., the post had gone viral. It had been shared 2,000 times and crossed over from the private forum to Twitter and TikTok. Crystal, seeing an opportunity to play the victim for clout, reposted it with a tearful video caption claiming she was terrified for her safety because of Dante's crazy ex. When I turned on my phone that morning, it nearly vibrated off the nightstand. My notifications were a sea of hate. Strangers were flooding my Instagram comments, calling me a scammer, a thief, and a psycho. Someone had found my LinkedIn profile and was tagging my former employers, demanding to know why they hired a fraudster. I sat in my office chair watching the number of death threats climb. A woman I had never met sent me a direct message saying she hoped I rotted in jail for what I did to that nice family. They were doxing me, posting the address of the library where I used to work, and even speculating about where I lived now. Becky had done her job well. She had turned the narrative upside down, making the abusers look like saints and the victim look like a monster. She thought this would break me. She thought I would shut down my accounts, hide in a hole, and beg for mercy to make it stop. She did not realize that in the world of high-stakes real estate, reputation is currency, but documentation is God. She had just handed me a libel lawsuit worth more than her husband's entire net worth on a silver platter. I took a screenshot of every single lie, every comment Becky liked, and every threat Crystal encouraged. I did not reply. I did not defend myself. I just printed everything out and put it in a crisp manila folder. I sat in the silence of my office, the blue light of the monitor illuminating the hate that scrolled endlessly down my screen. Thousands of strangers were calling for my head, demanding justice for a man who had never paid a bill in his life. The temptation to reply, to type out the truth in all caps and post the receipts right then and there, was a physical ache in my chest. But I knew better. Reacting now would only feed the fire Becky had started. It would make me look defensive and unstable, exactly the way she had painted me. So I did what a wolf does when surrounded by yapping dogs. I stayed silent, and I waited for the kill shot. I closed the laptop, picked up the thick manila folder containing every lie they had told, and drove downtown to the glass monolith that housed the offices of Sterling and Vance. Judith Sterling was a legend in Atlanta legal circles. A black woman who had clawed her way to the top of corporate law. She did not just win cases, she annihilated the opposition. When I walked into her corner office, she was standing by the window, looking out over the city she practically owned. She turned her eyes sharp and assessing, taking in the folder in my hand. "You look like a woman who is ready to go to war," she said, her voice smooth as velvet but heavy with authority. I placed the folder on her mahogany desk. "They are trying to destroy my reputation, Judith. They are doxing me, lying about my finances and claiming I stole the penthouse." Becky posted this 12 hours ago. Judith opened the file, her manicured finger tracing the lines of Becky's viral post. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Libel, defamation of character, intentional infliction of emotional distress. She flipped the page to the screenshots of Dante's threats. "And here we have harassment and fraud. This is not just a lawsuit, Simone, this is a retirement fund." She looked up at me, her gaze intense. "But you do not just want money, do you? You want to bury them." I nodded. "I want them to have nothing left. I want Dante to realize that every dollar he thought he had was mine." Judith leaned back in her chair, steepled her fingers. "Then we need to hit them where it hurts. The money. I have already drafted the cease and desist orders for the social media platforms, but that is just a slap on the wrist. We are going to audit the shell company you set up for Dante. We are going to call in the loans. Every dinner, every suit, every car payment he charged to the company card, thinking it was free money. We are going to classify it all as embezzlement. By the time we are done, he will be lucky if he is not in prison for tax evasion. But first, we let them think they are winning. Let them get comfortable in their lie. Then we pull the rug out from under the entire family. Are you ready to play the villain they think you are?" I looked at the city below, feeling the power of the silence I had kept. "I am not the villain," I said. "I am the reckoning." Dante strutted into the polished lobby of First City Bank, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the glass doors. He needed cash, and he needed it fast. The humiliation of the tow truck and the cramped hotel room was still fresh, but he had a plan. He would drain the joint account he shared with Simone, take the $20,000 he knew was sitting there, and use it to put a deposit on a new luxury rental. He would show everyone he was still on top. He walked up to the teller window, flashing his most charming smile at the young woman behind the glass. "Good morning, sweetheart," he purred, sliding his debit card across the counter. "I need to make a withdrawal. 20,000 in cash, large bills please. I have some business to attend to." The teller picked up the card and swiped it, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. She frowned, tapping the enter key a few times. "I am sorry, sir," she said, her brow furrowing in confusion. "This card has been declined." Dante let out a patronizing chuckle, leaning closer. "That is impossible, darling. Check it again. There is plenty of money in there. Maybe the system is slow today. Just override it. I am in a hurry." The teller did not smile back. Sir, I cannot override a frozen account. Your access has been revoked and the balance is 0. Dante's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure incredulity. 0. That is a lie. I checked it yesterday. There was 20 grand in there. That is my money. You cannot just freeze my account. I demand to see a manager right now. The teller sighed, pressing a button under the counter. One moment, sir. A minute later, the branch manager, a stern woman in a gray suit, approached the window holding a printout. Mr. Dante, she said, her voice clipped and professional. This account was closed this morning by the primary account holder, Ms. Simone. As the primary, she has the right to withdraw all funds and remove authorized users at any time. The $20,000 was transferred to a private account in her name. Since you were merely an authorized user and not a joint owner, you have no claim to the funds. Dante slammed his hand on the counter, making the teller jump. That is theft. He shouted, his voice echoing through the quiet bank. She stole my money. I put that money in there. You have to give it back. The manager looked at the printout again, a small smirk playing on her lips. Actually, sir, according to our records, you have not made a single deposit into this account in 3 years. All funds were transferred from Legacy Holdings, which is owned by Ms. Simone. Technically, you have been spending her money. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I will have to call security. Dante stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him. He had no cash, no credit cards, and no access to the lifestyle he had been flaunting. He was broke, completely and utterly broke. He grabbed his useless debit card off the counter and stormed out of the bank, his face burning with shame. He had walked in feeling like a king, and walked out realizing he was just a pauper who had been living on borrowed time and someone else's dime. Dante needed a win, and he needed it now. The empty bank account, the humiliation at the restaurant, and the loss of the penthouse had left him desperate to regain control of the narrative. He sat in the cramped living room of his mother's house, surrounded by the wreckage of his former life, watching Crystal scroll through Instagram with a bored expression. She was already getting restless, complaining about the lack of amenities and the smell of Verna's cooking. He knew he was losing her just like he had lost everything else. He needed a grand gesture, something so spectacular it would silence the haters and prove to everyone, including himself, that he was still the king of Atlanta. He dropped to one knee right there on the shag carpet, pulling a ring box from his pocket. It wasn't the cheap cubic zirconia he had given Simone. This was a flashy diamond he had bought on credit months ago, intended for this exact purpose. "Crystal, baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion he hoped looked genuine. "I know things are rough right now, but I am going to fix it. I am going to give you the world, starting with this. Will you marry me?" Crystal looked at the ring, her eyes widening as she calculated the carats. She squealed yes, throwing her arms around his neck, already imagining the engagement photos. But a ring wasn't enough. Dante stood up, energized by her acceptance. "We are not going to wait," he announced, his voice booming through the small house, drawing Verna and Becky from the kitchen. "We are getting married in 2 weeks, and we are going to do it at the manor." Becky gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The manor. "Dante, that place is impossible to book. It is the most exclusive venue in the state. Only the elite get married there. It costs a fortune." Dante waved a dismissive hand. "I have connections, Becky. I know people. I am going to pull some strings and get us in. We are going to have the wedding of the century. We are going to show Simone and everyone else that we are untouchable. We are going to broadcast it live. It will be the ultimate clapback." Crystal was already typing furiously on her phone, planning the aesthetic. "Oh my God, Dante. The manor is perfect. It is so old money. We are going to be legends." Verna wiped a tear from her eye, beaming at her son. "That is my boy. I knew you would bounce back. You deserve the best, Dante. You deserve a wedding that shows the world who you really are. Show that librarian what she missed out on." Dante grinned, feeling the power return to his veins. He didn't have the money for the deposit yet, but he would figure it out. He would borrow, beg, or steal if he had to. This wedding was not just a celebration of love, it was a declaration of war. He was going to crush Simone with his success, and he was going to do it in the most public way possible. He grabbed his phone and dialed the number for the manor, his confidence surging. He had no idea that the voice on the other end of the line would be all too happy to take his reservation, because the trap had already been set. Dante hung up the phone and spun around, his arms wide, a grin splitting his face that was equal parts relief and pure, unadulterated ego. "I told you," he shouted, his voice bouncing off the low ceilings of his mother's house. "The manor is booked, 2 weeks from Saturday. They moved a senator's retirement party just for me. That is the power of the Dante brand." Verna clapped her hands, squealing like a teenager, while Crystal immediately started typing the location into her wedding announcement. "You see that?" Verna crowed, pointing a manicured finger at Trey. "That is how you handle business. Your brother picks up a phone and doors open. That girl Simone could not get a reservation at a food court, and here is Dante booking the most exclusive estate in Georgia on 2 weeks' notice." Dante soaked in the praise, adjusting his cufflinks and looking every inch the master of the universe he pretended to be. He did not mention that the deposit had wiped out the last of the cash he had borrowed from a loan shark, or that he had promised to pay the balance in full the day before the wedding using funds he did not yet have. In his mind, the venue was just the first step. Once the investors saw him getting married at the manor, the money would flow in. It was all about optics. He told them he knew the owner personally, a silent partner he had helped out of a jam years ago. A lie, of course, but Dante had lied so much the truth felt foreign to him. He genuinely believed his own hype, convinced that the universe was simply bending to his will because he was destined for greatness. Miles away in a glass-walled office overlooking the very estate Dante was bragging about, the general manager of the manor sat with the phone receiver still in his hand. He looked at the caller ID, which displayed Dante's number, and then pressed a single speed dial button. It rang once before a cool, familiar voice answered. "Is it done?" Simone asked. Her voice was not angry or anxious, just efficient, like a surgeon asking for a scalpel. "Yes, Ms. Simone," the manager replied, his tone respectful. He took the bait. "He believes we cleared the schedule for him. He is wiring the deposit now." "Excellent," Simone said. "Send him the standard contract, but attach the morality rider we discussed. Clause 4B, regarding financial transparency and ethical conduct. Make the print small, but legible. He will not read it anyway. He never reads anything that does not have his name in bold letters. And ensure the cancellation policy puts the liability entirely on the renter for any breach of contract. I want him to sign his own warrant." The manager hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Are you sure about this, ma'am? If he defaults or causes a scene, it could disrupt operations." Simone's laugh was soft and dry. "He will definitely cause a scene, Marcus. That is the point. Just make sure the cameras are working and the security team is on standby. I am approving the booking personally. Let him have his fantasy for 2 weeks. When he walks down that aisle, he is walking into a trap, not a marriage." The manager hung up and opened the digital file for the wedding contract. He added the specific rider. Simone had drafted a clause so tight it would strangle Dante's finances the moment he stepped out of line. He hit send, watching the progress bar fill up. On the other side of town, Dante's phone pinged. He glanced at the contract, scrolled past the pages of legal text without reading a single word, and signed his name with a flourish of his finger on the screen. He thought he had just secured his legacy. In reality, he had just signed a confession. Lumiere Bridal was the kind of establishment where they served imported champagne before you even looked at a price tag. Crystal stood on the velvet pedestal, bathed in soft, flattering lighting, wearing a $20,000 lace masterpiece that hugged her curves and trailed behind her for 6 feet. Verna sat on the plush sofa, clapping her hands together like a seal at a circus. She was already mentally spending money she did not have, instructing the sales associate to add a matching cathedral veil and a diamond tiara. She wanted the world to know her son was marrying royalty, not the library charity case she had just evicted. I walked in through the private entrance near the back. I was there to review the quarterly revenue figures with the owner, since my investment firm held a 40% stake in the brand. I was dressed in a sharp navy blazer and trousers, holding a tablet, not looking for trouble, but trouble has a way of finding me when it wears cheap perfume. Verna spotted me first. Her eyes bulged and she literally jumped off the sofa, knocking over a flute of complimentary champagne. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her voice shrill enough to shatter the crystal chandelier overhead. "You! What are you doing here? Are you stalking us now?" Verna marched across the showroom floor, ignoring the startled looks of the other brides. "You just cannot let it go, can you? You knew we were coming here. You are trying to ruin Crystal's moment because you are jealous that my son never bought you a dress like this. Get out. Get out right now. You are bad luck. You are like a black cat crossing our path. I do not want your failure energy infecting my new daughter-in-law." Crystal turned on the pedestal, posing dramatically so the light hit her best angles. "Let her look," Verna Crystal cooed, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Let her see what a real bride looks like. Maybe she can take notes for her next imaginary wedding." It is sad, really. She probably came here to try on dresses she can never afford just to feel special. "Simone, honey, this section is for VIPs. The clearance rack is in the basement next to the dumpster." I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I just looked at the sales manager, who had rushed over looking terrified. Verna got in my face, her breath smelling of stale coffee and malice. "Did you hear me? I said leave. This is a private appointment for the Dante family. We have a standing discount here because we are preferred clients. We do not need a washed-up ex-girlfriend haunting the aisles. Security, remove this woman. She is harassing the bride. She is putting bad juju on the wedding." The manager looked from Verna to me, her face pale. She knew exactly who I was. She knew I had approved the renovation of this showroom. She also knew that the standing discount Verna was bragging about was actually a friends and family code linked directly to my personal account from years ago. Verna thought she was VIP because of Dante's charm. She had no idea she was shopping on my dime in my store while screaming in my face. I looked at the $20,000 price tag hanging from Crystal's waist, and then I looked at the manager. I did not have to say a word. The slight arch of my eyebrow told her everything she needed to know. It was time to correct an accounting error. I gave the manager a single sharp nod. She straightened her spine, adjusting her blazer, and turned back to the register, her face composed into a mask of professional regret. Verna followed, her head held high, dragging Crystal along like a prize pony. "Wrap it up," Verna commanded, slapping a platinum credit card onto the glass surface. "And make sure you apply the VIP discount. The owner knows my son personally. We get 40% off." Yeah. She cast a smug look over her shoulder at me. "See, Simone? This is how the other half lives. We do not look at price tags because we have connections. You should take notes." I leaned against a display case, crossing my arms. The manager picked up the card and inserted it into the chip reader. She typed on her keyboard for a moment, then stopped. "I am sorry, Mrs. Verna," she said, her voice projecting clearly in the quiet showroom. "I cannot apply that discount code today. In fact, I have been instructed to remove it permanently from your profile." Verna's laugh was sharp and incredulous. "Excuse me. Do you know who I am? That code has worked for 3 years. It is the Dante family code. Call the owner right now. He will tell you to give it to me. He will probably fire you for being so incompetent." Crystal sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Just pay the full price, Verna. Dante will fix it later. I want to get out of here. This place has bad vibes now." The manager looked directly at Verna, her expression unyielding. "Actually, ma'am, that discount code is not linked to the Dante family. It is the shareholder friends and family code linked specifically to Ms. Simone's equity portfolio." Since Ms. Simone is standing right there and has just signaled that you are not authorized users, I have removed the 40% reduction. The total for the dress, the veil, and the expedited alterations comes to $24,500. Verna turned purple. That is a lie, she shrieked. My son knows the owner. He is the one who got us this deal. Simone is just a librarian. She does not own equity in anything. Just run the card. I am not paying full price. This is bait and switch. I will sue this entire store. The manager pressed a button and the card machine beeped a harsh, rejecting tone. I am afraid that point is moot, ma'am, she said, sliding the card back across the counter. This card has been declined. The issuer reports insufficient funds and a freeze on the account. Would you like to try another form of payment? The silence that fell over the boutique was heavy and suffocating. The other brides stopped their fittings to watch. Crystal dropped her phone, her mouth hanging open. Declined, Verna whispered, staring at the platinum card as if it had betrayed her. That is impossible. Dante just put 50,000 in that account yesterday. He told me to use it for the wedding. Try it again. It is your machine. Your machine is broken just like your discount system. I pushed off the display case and walked toward the door, my heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. It is not the machine, Verna, I said without looking back. It is the reality check. You cannot spend money you do not have using a discount that does not belong to you. I suggest you put the dress back. Crystal might have to get married in something off the rack, maybe something within your actual tax bracket. I walked out into the sunshine, leaving Verna frantically digging through her purse for a credit card that was not maxed out while Crystal started to cry real ugly tears, realizing her dream dress was evaporating along with her fiancé's fake fortune. Verna stood at the counter, her face a mask of sweating foundation and crumbling dignity. Crystal was sobbing loudly now, a jagged, ugly sound that drew stares from the other brides who were happily sipping their champagne. Fix it, Verna, she wailed, stomping her foot like a toddler in a tiara. You promised. You said Dante had money. I am not leaving here without this dress. The manager stood with her arms crossed, the card reader blinking its rejection like a mocking red eye. I watched from the reflection in the shop window outside, leaning against the brick wall. I did not need to be inside to know exactly what was happening. Verna was trapped. If she walked out now, the illusion of wealth she had carefully curated for her new daughter-in-law would shatter completely. Crystal would walk, and Dante would be left with nothing. Verna pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling so hard she dropped it once before dialing. I could see her mouthing words, her expression shifting from arrogance to desperation. She called her sister first. I knew because Verna screamed, "Just loan me 5,000, I will pay you back on Tuesday," before pulling the phone away from her ear, as if she had been yelled at. She hung up and dialed again. This time it was a friend from her church group, a woman Verna usually looked down on for driving a Toyota. Gladys, darling, how are you? Listen, I am in a bit of a bind. The bank made a clerical error with Dante's accounts. Terrible mess. I need a bridge loan. Just 20,000. Yes, today. Right now. The conversation dragged on, Verna's voice dropping to a harsh whisper as she negotiated away her pride. She had to promise to chair the charity committee, a job she hated, and apparently offer up her grandmother's silver tea set as collateral. It was pathetic. It was visceral. Finally, she hung up, her face gray. Transfer the money, she snapped at the manager, handing over a different card, a debit card linked to her personal savings that she had sworn never to touch. Run it again, and wrap it up. We are leaving this hellhole. The manager ran the card. This time it went through. Verna snatched the receipt, crumpling it in her fist. She turned to Crystal, her eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. Dry your face, she hissed. You got your dress. Now stop crying and look like a winner. She grabbed the garment bag as if it were a weapon. As they pushed out the door, Verna spotted me still standing on the sidewalk. She did not scream this time. She did not make a scene. She walked right up to me, close enough that I could see the veins throbbing in her forehead. "You think you are clever," she whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You think you can embarrass me in public and get away with it. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Simone. I am going to make sure you lose everything. I will not just sue you. I will ruin you. I will make sure no man in Atlanta ever looks at you again." She shoved past me, dragging Crystal toward the parking lot. I watched them go, clutching their $24,000 victory that had cost them their last shred of dignity. Verna thought she had won a battle. She did not realize she had just financed her own destruction. Dante sat in the sticky leather booth of a dive bar, nursing a cheap beer that he had to pay for with quarters found in his couch cushions. Becky sat across from him, her face illuminated by the glow of her iPad. She was scrolling through legal forums, her eyes narrowed in concentration. She had been like a dog with a bone ever since the boutique incident, refusing to accept defeat. Verna was at home crying over her maxed-out credit cards, but Becky was planning war. "Look at this, Dante," she hissed, sliding the tablet across the table. "It is called common law marriage. In Georgia, if you live together, present yourselves as married, and share finances, you are practically married in the eyes of the law. You lived with her for 3 years, right? You shared that penthouse. You drove her car." Dante squinted at the screen, the legal jargon blurring before his eyes. "So what?" he muttered, taking a swig of warm beer. "We never got a marriage license, Becky. We were just engaged." "That does not matter," Becky insisted, her voice rising with excitement. "It is about intent. You introduced her as your wife at parties sometimes, right? You shared expenses, even if it was just her paying for everything, it still counts as commingling of assets. If a judge rules that you were common law married, you are entitled to half. Half of everything, Dante. Half of Legacy Holdings, half of the manor, half of whatever scam money she is sitting on." A slow grin spread across Dante's face. "Half," he repeated, testing the word. "She has millions, Becky. If I get half, I am back in the game. I can pay off the debts. I can buy a real G-Wagon, not just lease one. I can ruin her." "But wait. She said she bought those properties years ago. Does that count?" Becky waved a dismissive hand. "It is marital property if it was maintained during the relationship. Plus, we can argue that she used your business acumen to build her portfolio. You gave her advice, right? You told her about the market. We can say she stole your intellectual property to build her empire." "It is brilliant, Dante. She defrauded you. She played the role of the broke librarian to hide assets from her partner. That is financial infidelity." Energized by this new delusion, Dante marched into the office of a strip mall lawyer the next morning. He did not have money for a retainer, but he promised the lawyer a 30% cut of the settlement. The lawyer, a sweaty man named Saul who smelled of desperate ambition, listened to Dante's fabricated story with greedy eyes. "So you are telling me this woman lived off your connections, used your name to get into high society, and then cut you out when she hit the jackpot?" Saul asked, leaning back in his creaking chair. "That is exactly it," Dante lied, his confidence returning. "She was nobody before me. I made her. I built Legacy Holdings in my head. She just signed the papers. I want what is mine. I want 50% plus damages for emotional distress." They filed the paperwork that afternoon. It was a masterpiece of fiction, claiming that Simone and Dante had a verbal contract to share all assets, and that Simone had maliciously hidden her wealth to defraud her common-law husband. Dante signed the affidavit with a flourish, feeling the power return to his fingertips. He wasn't just a scorned ex anymore. He was a plaintiff. He was a victim seeking justice. He sent a text to Simone, a picture of the court filing with a caption that read, "See you in court, sweetie. Hope you have a good lawyer." He had no idea that he had just handed Judith Sterling the final nail for his coffin. He thought he was playing chess, but he was actually playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. The mediation room at Sterling and Vance smelled of lemon polish and intimidation. Dante sat across from me, his feet up on the mahogany table, like he owned the place. Next to him, Saul, his strip mall lawyer, was sweating through a suit that had clearly seen better days. Dante tossed a stack of crinkled papers onto the table with a triumphant smack. "There it is," he announced, leaning back with a smug grin. "Proof of my contributions. I paid for dinners, trips, and household maintenance. I was a partner in every sense of the word. I want my half, Simone, and I want it now." I looked at the receipts. They were handwritten scraps, notes on napkins, and printed invoices from businesses that looked suspiciously like they were created on a home computer an hour ago. It was pathetic. Judith picked up one of the papers with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated waste. "Mr. Dante, this is a receipt for a car wash written in crayon," she said, her voice dry as dust. "Is this the extent of your financial contribution to a multi-million-dollar estate?" Dante scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "It is symbolic. It shows intent. I invested my time, my energy, my brand. Simone used my image to build her business. I want 50% plus interest." Judith sighed and opened a thick binder she had placed in front of her. The sound of the heavy cover hitting the table made Saul jump. "Let us discuss where the money actually went," she said. She slid a spreadsheet across the table. It was color-coded and devastatingly detailed. "We ran a forensic accounting audit on the joint account and the credit cards you had access to. It appears that while you claim to have been investing in the household, you were actually investing in something else. Or rather, someone else." Dante frowned, pulling the paper closer. "What is this?" Judith pointed to a highlighted column. "These are transfers to a Zelle account registered to Crystal Banks, starting 14 months ago. You paid her rent, Dante. You bought her a Gucci bag on Simone's birthday using Simone's card. You took her to Miami 3 times last year while telling my client you were at a tech conference. The total comes to $50,000 of misappropriated funds." The room went silent. Dante's face turned a sickly shade of gray. He looked at me, his eyes wide with panic. "That is a lie," he stammered. "I was consulting her. She is a client." "A client you took to a couple's resort in Jamaica?" Judith asked, raising an eyebrow. "We have the flight manifests and the hotel folio. You booked the honeymoon suite." Saul grabbed the paper from Dante, his hands shaking. He read the numbers and his face fell. He looked at Dante with pure disgust. "You told me you were faithful," he hissed. "You told me she was the villain. This changes everything." Judicial looked at Saul. "It certainly does. We are countersuing for theft, fraud, and embezzlement. And since these transfers crossed state lines, we are considering federal charges." Judith leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Saul. "Here are your options, counselor. Option 1. Your client withdraws this frivolous lawsuit immediately and signs a document admitting that all claims regarding common law marriage and joint assets were fabricated. He will also agree to repay the $50,000 he stole plus legal fees." Saul opened his mouth to protest, but Judith held up a hand. "Option 2, we proceed to court, but we will not just be defending against your claims. We will be presenting evidence of tax fraud. Your client claimed 0 income on his tax returns for the last 3 years to avoid paying student loans, yet he somehow managed to spend thousands on luxury vacations. The IRS will be very interested in how he financed that lifestyle. We will also be filing a report with the district attorney regarding the forged lease agreement he presented to the police. That is a felony, Mr. Saul. Do you want your name attached to a client who is about to be indicted for multiple counts of fraud?" Saul turned to Dante, his face pale and sweating. "Is this true?" he whispered harshly. "Did you lie on your taxes? Did you forge documents?" Dante looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting around the room looking for an escape. "It was just creative accounting," he muttered. "Everyone does it. I was going to pay it back once the company took off. I just needed a little more time." Saul slammed his briefcase shut. "I am done," he announced, standing up. "I cannot represent you. You lied to me. I am withdrawing as counsel effective immediately." He marched out of the room, leaving Dante alone and exposed. Dante looked at me, desperation etched into every line of his face. Simone, please, he begged, his bravado completely gone. You cannot do this. You will ruin me. I have nothing. If you report me, I will go to jail. Just let me have the wedding. Please, I need the money from the gifts to pay you back. I will sign whatever you want, just do not call the cops. The wedding is in 2 weeks. If I cancel now, everyone will know I am a failure. Let me have this one thing and I promise I will disappear. Judith looked at me, raising an eyebrow, silently asking if I wanted to twist the knife. I looked at the man I had once thought I would marry. He was pathetic, broken, and terrified. But he was also a liar who had tried to steal my life. You can have your wedding, I said, my voice cold. But you sign the admission of guilt today, and you start a payment plan immediately. If you miss one payment, if you lie one more time, I will hand this entire file to the authorities. Dante nodded frantically, grabbing the pen. Thank you, he gasped, signing the paper with shaking hands. Thank you, Simone. You won't regret this. I walked out of the office, leaving him with his shame. He thought he had won a reprieve. He didn't know he was just walking into a bigger trap. The wedding wasn't his salvation, it was his execution. The night before the wedding, Becky threw herself a bachelorette party by proxy, hosting a lavish soiree for Crystal at a rooftop lounge in Buckhead that she could not afford. The theme was diamonds and divorcees, a tacky nod to Dante's upcoming nuptials, and a blatant dig at me. The champagne flowed freely, paid for by yet another maxed-out credit card Verna had managed to open in her husband's name. Becky was in her element, holding court in a VIP section, surrounded by women who thrived on gossip and schadenfreude. She pulled out her phone, her face flushed with alcohol and malice, and started a live stream titled The Upgrade Party. Hey everyone, Becky slurred into the camera, panning around the glittering skyline. We are here celebrating the future Mrs. Dante, the woman who finally put a ring on it. Unlike some people we know, who are probably sitting at home alone eating cat food. Crystal leaned into the frame, giggling and waving her massive engagement ring at the lens. So blessed, she chirped. Dante is such a king, he really leveled up, you guys. No more dusty librarians for him. We are moving into the manor tomorrow and it is going to be epic. I watched the live stream from my office on the 45th floor of the Legacy Holdings Tower. The city lights twinkled below me, a sea of ambition and secrets. My office was dark save for the glow of the monitor and the city outside. I swirled a glass of sparkling water, my reflection ghosting against the glass. They looked so happy, so confident in their victory. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was about to open up. Becky was laughing now, reading comments from her followers who were eager to tear me down. Poor Simone, someone commented. She must be devastated. Becky snorted. Devastated is an understatement, honey. She is ruined. She tried to sue us, but Dante shut her down. He is a boss. I closed the laptop, the sound echoing in the silent room. They were celebrating a mirage, dancing on the edge of a cliff. I picked up a thick binder from my desk, the cover labeled Operation Manor Breach. Inside was every detail of tomorrow's execution. The security protocols, the lighting cues, the video file loaded and ready to play. I flipped to the guest list. Every major investor, every socialite, every person Dante had been trying to impress for years was coming. He had done my work for me, gathering an audience for his own destruction. I checked my watch. It was midnight. In 12 hours, Dante would stand at the altar expecting to be crowned king. Instead, he would be dethroned in front of the very people he worshipped. I felt a cold thrill of anticipation. I was not angry anymore. Anger was hot and messy. This was business. This was a hostile takeover of a fraudulent enterprise. I picked up my phone and sent a single text to Marcus, the manager at the manor. Green light. The reply came instantly. All systems go. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that was mine. Sleep well, Dante, I whispered to the glass. You are going to need your rest. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. The manor looked like a scene from a period drama brought to life by modern excess. The driveway was a parade of Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and Maybachs, delivering the crème de la crème of Atlanta's black elite to the front steps. Dante stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom posing as the benevolent monarch of this kingdom. He was wearing a white tuxedo jacket that he had charged to a credit card opened in his brother Trey's name just that morning. Sweat was already beading at his hairline, despite the powerful air conditioning, but he kept his smile plastered on wide and bright. He shook hands with venture capitalists, gripped the shoulders of tech moguls, and bowed respectfully to the matriarchs of society, families he had spent years trying to infiltrate. To Dante, this sea of expensive fabrics and old money represented his salvation. He had turned his wedding into a high-stakes fundraising gala. Every handshake was a pitch. Every toast was going to be a plea for capital for his shell company. He calculated the net worth walking through the door and saw enough potential investment to pay off his debts, silence Simone, and perhaps even buy a real house before the eviction notices found him. He was manic with the possibility of it all, believing he had successfully pulled the wool over the eyes of the city's sharpest business minds. However, Dante was deaf to the frequency of the whispers circulating among the champagne flutes. The guests were not there to celebrate a love match between a failed entrepreneur and an Instagram model. They were there because the invitation had carried the watermark of the manor, a venue known to be under the new and mysterious ownership of Legacy Holdings. The rumor mill had been churning for 48 hours. Word had leaked from the country clubs and boardrooms that the elusive owner of Legacy Holdings was finally going to reveal herself. They knew Dante was a small fish swimming in a shark tank, and they had come to watch him get eaten. I watched on the security monitors from the owner's suite on the third floor. I saw Mr. Johnson, a real estate tycoon who had turned me down for a loan 5 years ago, asking Dante pointed questions about his revenue streams. Dante laughed nervously, clapping Mr. Johnson on the back and pivoting to grab a waiter. He did not notice the look Mr. Johnson exchanged with his wife, a look that said, "This boy is drowning." The guests were like vultures circling a carcass, waiting for the moment of death. They complimented Crystal's dress while whispering about her credit score. They toasted Dante's success while checking their phones for updates on the lawsuits filed against him. Dante spotted a heavy hitter from the banking sector and practically sprinted over, ignoring his own mother who was trying to introduce him to a distant cousin. "I need 5 minutes of your time, sir," Dante urged, his desperation leaking through his charm. "My algorithm is going to change the market. I just need a bridge loan to finalize the patent." The banker smiled a shark-like grin that never reached his eyes. "Let us see how the ceremony goes, son." He deflected his eyes, scanning the room. "I hear the landlord might be making an appearance. I would not want to miss that." Dante laughed, oblivious. "Oh, I know the landlord. We are tight. She is probably just coming to wish me luck." The banker's smile widened into something predatory. "Is that so? Well, then this should be a very interesting afternoon indeed." The smell of searing filet mignon was suddenly replaced by the acrid scent of panic in the industrial kitchen of the manor. 1 minute. It was a symphony of clattering pans and shouting chefs preparing a 5-course meal for 300 of Atlanta's most judgmental palates. The next minute, it was plunged into darkness. The hum of the walk-in refrigerators died with a sputtering cough, leaving an eerie silence that was broken only by the head chef cursing loudly in French. The emergency lights flickered on, casting long, ominous shadows across the stainless steel counters, turning the culinary sanctuary into a scene from a horror movie. Dante burst through the swinging double doors, his white tuxedo jacket already showing sweat stains under the arms, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated stress. "What is going on back here?" he screamed, his voice cracking as it echoed off the tiled walls. "Why are the lights out? I have investors sitting in the ballroom waiting for the amuse-bouche if that lobster goes bad. I am suing every single one of you." He grabbed a busboy by the collar, shaking him roughly. "Fix it. Fix it right now. Do you know how much I paid for this venue? Do you know who I am?" The head chef slammed a heavy ladle onto the counter, making Dante jump. "It is not a fuse, you idiot!" he shouted back, wiping sweat from his brow with a towel. "The entire grid for the service wing has been remotely disabled. The ovens are off. The warmers are cold. We cannot plate food in the dark, and we certainly cannot cook without heat. You need to call maintenance before I walk out of here and take my crew with me. I have a reputation to protect, and I will not serve cold steak at a wedding." Dante turned a shade of purple that clashed violently with his white suit. He looked around wildly, spotting Marcus, the general manager, standing calmly by the emergency exit, holding a tablet illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. "You!" Dante roared, marching over to him. "Turn the power back on immediately. This is a breach of contract. I rented this facility with full utilities. I am ordering you to flip the switch, or I will have your job." Marcus did not flinch. He looked at Dante with the bored expression of a man watching a toddler throw a tantrum in a supermarket. "I am afraid I cannot do that, sir," Marcus replied, his voice smooth and professional. "The electrical grid for the manor is controlled by a biometric security system located in the owner's private server room on the top floor." Dante grabbed Marcus's lapels, getting in his face, his breath hot and frantic. "Then go to the server room and scan your hand. Do your job. I do not care about security protocols. I care about my wedding dinner. Get up there and turn the lights on before I destroy you." Marcus gently removed Dante's hands, brushing off his suit jacket as if he had been touched by something unclean. "You misunderstand, Mr. Dante. My clearance does not extend to the master. Override. Only the owner has the biometric authority to intervene in the main electrical system once a lockdown has been initiated, and the system indicates that the lockdown was triggered manually from the penthouse suite 5 minutes ago." Dante froze, the blood draining from his face. The penthouse suite. He looked up at the ceiling as if he could see through the layers of concrete and crystal chandeliers to the floor above. "Who is up there?" he whispered, a flicker of true fear finally piercing his arrogance. "You said?" "The owner was a silent partner. You said he was out of town." Marcus smiled, a tight professional smile that did not reach his eyes. "I said, the owner values privacy, sir. I never said he was a he, and I certainly never said she was out of town. In fact, she is currently monitoring the situation via the internal network. She has full control of the building's infrastructure. The power will return when she decides. It returns, not a moment sooner." The strains of the string quartet filled the vaulted ceiling of the grand ballroom, masking the frantic whispers of the catering staff, who were still working in the dark behind the scenes. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the room swung open, revealing Crystal in a halo of professional lighting that Becky had set up specifically for this moment. A collective gasp went through the room, not of awe, but of calculation, as 300 pairs of eyes assessed the net worth of the lace and silk dragging across the antique floorboards. Crystal looked undeniably stunning, her face painted to perfection by a makeup artist she had promised to pay in exposure. She walked slowly, clutching a bouquet of imported orchids that cost more than my first car. Her eyes fixed on Dante with a look of fierce determination. She was walking toward her future, a future she believed was paved with gold bullion and black cards. She did not see a man drowning in debt standing at the altar. She saw a ladder, and she was climbing it one expensive step at a time. In the front row, Becky was already live streaming, holding her phone high to capture every angle. She had curated her caption perfectly, typing with one thumb while holding a glass of champagne in the other. "Finally, a real wedding," she whispered to her followers, her voice low but distinct enough to be picked up by the microphone. "This is what class looks like, you guys. No drama, no budget cuts, just pure elegance. Eat your heart out, Simone." She panned the camera over the crowd, lingering on the faces of the investors Dante was trying to court, making sure to tag them in real time. She wanted the world to see that the Dante family had arrived, that they belonged in this room with its crystal chandeliers and velvet draperies. She did not care that the rental fee was unpaid or that the car she arrived in was about to be repossessed. She only cared about the likes rolling in on her screen. Beside her, Verna was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, sobbing loudly enough to draw attention, but not loud enough to drown out the music. "My baby boy," she wailed to anyone who would listen, clutching the arm of a bewildered banker sitting next to her. "He made it. He found a woman who truly deserves him." She looked at Dante with a predatory pride, her tears a mixture of relief and greed. She believed that once Crystal said "I do," the financial bleeding would stop. She thought this marriage was a business merger that would save them all from the consequences of their spending. She did not see a son about to be destroyed. She saw a winning lottery ticket standing at the altar waiting to be cashed. Dante stood at the front of the room, sweating through his white tuxedo. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his smile tight and strained. He was watching the lights, praying they would not flicker out like the ones in the kitchen. He saw Crystal approaching and felt a surge of adrenaline. If he could just get the ring on her finger, if he could just seal the deal before the landlord intervened, he might survive this. He locked eyes with his bride, ignoring the murmurs of the crowd, ignoring the looming threat of the woman upstairs. He told himself he was winning. He told himself this was his moment. The music swelled to a crescendo as Crystal reached the altar, and the room held its breath, waiting for the fairy tale to begin, or for the nightmare to start. The minister cleared his throat, his voice booming through the silent hall, demanding the attention of every soul in the room. "If there is anyone here present who knows just cause, why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence that followed was thick and heavy, stretching out for what felt like an eternity. Dante exhaled a breath he did not know he was holding, his shoulders relaxing as the seconds ticked by. He scanned the room with a challenge in his eyes, daring anyone to make a move. For a solid 10 seconds it seemed like he had won. He squeezed Crystal's hand, ready to rush through the vows and get to the part where he signed the marriage license and secured his access to her family's trust fund. Then the world went black. It was not a flicker like the kitchen incident earlier. It was a total, immediate blackout of the stage lighting, leaving only the emergency exit signs, casting a sickly green glow over the altar. The murmur of the crowd rose like a tidal wave, confused and frightened. Dante spun around, looking for Marcus, ready to scream again, but before he could open his mouth, a hum of electricity filled the air. Behind the altar, a massive projection screen that had been retracted into the ceiling began to descend, its motor whining in the sudden quiet. A beam of light cut through the darkness, hitting the screen with blinding intensity. It was not a montage of childhood photos or a romantic slideshow of their courtship. It was a high-definition video, time-stamped just 3 days ago, taken from the security camera in Dante's mother's kitchen. The audio crackled to life, booming through the ballroom's surround sound system, drowning out the confused whispers of the guests. On the screen, Dante was sitting at the kitchen table nursing a beer, while Becky leaned against the counter counting a stack of cash. The image was crisp, capturing every bead of sweat on Dante's forehead. "I just need to hold it together for 72 hours. Dante's voice echoed through the ballroom loud and clear. "Once that ring is on her finger, her daddy writes the check for the venture capital. We take that money, funnel it into the shell company to pay off the debts, and then I file for divorce in 6 months." Becky laughed in the video, a harsh, cruel sound. "You are a genius, Dante. Crystal is so desperate she will not even read the prenup. We take the dowry, clear the books, and then you kick her to the curb just like you did with Simone. She is just a stepping stone, bro. Once we have the cash, she is trash." The video froze on Dante's sneering face, the words "cash is trash" echoing in the rafters. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, terrifying in its intensity. It was the silence of 300 people realizing they had just witnessed a confession to conspiracy and fraud. Dante stood frozen at the altar, his face illuminated by the giant image of his own betrayal. He slowly turned to look at Crystal. Her veil was trembling. The bouquet of expensive orchids fell from her hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel coming down. She was not looking at Dante. She was staring at the screen, her eyes wide with a horror that was quickly hardening into a rage so pure it could burn the building down. Verna had stopped crying. She sat in the front row, her mouth open, staring at the video of her children plotting the destruction of the girl standing 5 feet away from her. The trap had snapped shut, and there was no way out. The projection screen did not go dark after Dante's confession. Instead, it flickered with a static hiss before cutting to a new scene, this one time-stamped just 2 days prior. The setting was unmistakable. It was the cramped living room of Verna's rental house, a space filled with mismatched furniture and an overwhelming amount of clutter. On the massive high-definition screen, hovering above the altar, Verna appeared larger than life, lounging in her favorite recliner, with a glass of cheap box wine in her hand. Becky was sitting on the floor painting her toenails, and the conversation that boomed through the ballroom speakers was so crystal clear, it sounded as if Verna was standing right there at the podium, holding a microphone. "I cannot believe I have to pretend to like those people for another 48 hours. Verna complained in the video, taking a long swig of wine. Her face was twisted in a sneer of absolute disgust as she gestured vaguely in the air. That mother of hers is a walking disaster. Did you see the hat she wore to the rehearsal dinner? It looked like a dead bird nested on her head and died of shame. They think just because they own a chain of car washes and have a few million in the bank that they are high society. It is embarrassing, really. They are nothing but trash with cash, ignorant new money trying to buy class they will never have. In the ballroom, the air was sucked out of the room. 300 heads turned simultaneously toward the second row where Crystal's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Banks, were sitting. Mr. Banks, a large man with rough hands who had built his empire from the ground up, turned a shade of crimson that matched the carpet. Mrs. Banks, clutching her designer purse, looked as if she had been slapped across the face. On the screen, the Verna in the video continued her tirade, oblivious to the destruction she was causing in the future. And the father, Verna, scoffed, rolling her eyes. "He eats like a pig. I watched him at dinner trying to use the wrong fork for the salad. It was painful. I almost told him to just use his hands, since that is clearly what he is used to. But we have to play nice, Becky. We have to smile and nod and listen to their boring stories about hard work and sacrifice until the wedding checks clear. Once Dante secures the dowry and gets access to their liquid assets, we can stop inviting them to holidays. We will just say we are traveling. I do not want those uneducated hillbillies ruining my Christmas photos. They are just ATMs with legs, darling, nothing more." The video Verna laughed, a harsh cackling sound that echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the manor. In the present, Verna sat frozen in her front row seat, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked terrifyingly small, as the weight of her own words crashed down on her. The silence in the room broke not with a whisper, but with the sound of a heavy chair being shoved back violently against the hardwood floor. Mr. Banks stood up. He did not look at the screen anymore. He looked directly at Verna, his eyes burning with a fury that made the security guards at the perimeter step forward nervously. He was a man who commanded respect. A man who had worked 18-hour days for 30 years to give his daughter the life she wanted, and he had just heard himself described as a wallet by a woman who had never earned an honest dollar in her life. "Is that what we are to you, Verna?" Mr. Banks bellowed, his voice shaking with rage loud enough to be heard without a microphone. "You sat at my table, you ate my food, you drank my wine, and you called us family. And this is what you really think? You think we are ignorant. You think we are trash." Verna scrambled to her feet, her hands waving frantically in front of her, as if she could physically erase the video playing behind her. "No, no, Arthur, please," she shrieked, her voice pitching up into hysteria. "That is not real. It is fake. It is that AI technology." Simone did this. She made a computer voice sound like me. I never said those things. I love you and Martha. You are like a brother to me. Mrs. Banks stood up next, her face streaked with tears, but her jaw set in stone. She pointed a manicured finger at the screen, where the video Verna was now mocking the way Mrs. Banks spoke. "You are a liar, Verna," Mrs. Banks said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I knew something was wrong. I told Arthur you looked at us like we were dirt. You ungrateful witch. We paid for this entire wedding. We paid for your dress. We paid for the limo that brought you here, and you planned to cut us off. You planned to steal our money and run." The crowd erupted. It was no longer a polite society gathering, it was a mob. The wealthy investors who had been considering giving Dante money were now looking at the family with open revulsion. They whispered furiously among themselves, pointing at the screen and then at Verna. The mask had not just slipped, it had been ripped off and burned. Crystal stood at the altar, looking from the screen to her parents to Verna. The realization was dawning on her face, slow and painful. She was not marrying into a dynasty, she was marrying into a den of thieves who despised the very people putting clothes on their backs. On the screen, the video Verna took another sip of wine and delivered the final blow. "Just make sure Crystal does not get pregnant immediately," Verna sneered to Becky. "I do not want grandbabies with those genes. We need to dilute the bloodline a bit before we start having heirs. We will just get Dante to convince her she needs to focus on her career for a few years. By then, we will have the money and he can find someone better, someone with actual pedigree." The gasp that went through the room was audible. That was the line. That was the unforgivable sin. Crystal let out a strangled sob and stepped back from Dante as if he were radioactive. Mr. Banks began to march toward the front of the room, his fists clenched, knocking over a flower arrangement in his path. The perfectly curated facade of the Dante family had disintegrated, leaving only the ugly, rotting truth exposed for all of Atlanta to see. I watched from the control room, sipping my tea, feeling the grim satisfaction of a debt finally being paid in full. The video was over, but the show was just beginning. The cacophony of shouting voices and weeping mothers was cut short by a sound that reverberated like a cannon shot. The massive double doors at the entrance of the ballroom were thrown open with such force that they banged against the interior walls. The sudden influx of natural light blinded the room for a moment, creating a silhouette that stood in the threshold like an avenging angel. The arguments died instantly. Mr. Banks lowered his fist. Verna choked on her denial. 300 heads snapped toward the back of the room as I stepped out of the blinding glare and into the hall. I was not wearing a wedding dress. I was not there to be a bride. I was dressed in a bespoke white power suit, the fabric crisp and sharp, tailored to perfection, to emphasize not my beauty, but my authority. It was a visual declaration of war against the white tuxedo Dante was sweating through. Flanking me on either side were two broad-shouldered security guards in dark glasses, and slightly behind me walked Judith Sterling, carrying a briefcase that contained the end of Dante's life as he knew it. I began to walk down the center aisle, the same aisle Crystal had just glided down with dreams of wealth. My heels struck the hardwood floor with a rhythmic, deliberate clack that echoed in the silence. It was the sound of judgment approaching. The guests parted ways, instinctively pressing themselves against the pews as if afraid that touching me would burn them. I saw the faces of the investors who had ignored my emails years ago, now looking at me with recognition and fear. I saw the socialites who had mocked my shoes now staring at the limited edition pumps that cost more than their mortgages. I did not look at Verna. I did not look at Crystal. I kept my eyes locked on Dante. He stood at the altar looking small and withered, his hands trembling by his sides. He looked like a man waking up from a dream to find himself in a prison cell. I reached the foot of the altar and climbed the 3 marble steps. The minister, who had been standing there with his mouth open, seemingly forgot his holy vows and stepped aside without a word. I reached out and took the microphone from his limp hand. The feedback whine pierced the air for a split second before I silenced it with a tap of my finger. I looked out at the sea of stunned faces, taking a moment to let the tension build until it was suffocating. My voice, when I finally spoke, was calm, cool, and amplified to reach every corner of the estate. I apologized for the dramatic interruption. and the technical difficulties with the lighting. I said my tone conversational as if I were addressing a board meeting. However, I felt it was necessary to shed some light on the situation before any legal contracts were signed. I paused, turning slightly to look Dante in the eye. My name is Simone. I am the CEO of Legacy Holdings, and I am the sole owner of the manor. I gestured to Judith, who stepped forward and placed a crisp document in my hand. It was the rental agreement, the one Dante had signed on his phone without reading a single word. I held it up, the paper stark white against my suit. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice steady. When Mr. Dante booked this venue, he agreed to a very specific set of terms and conditions. Specifically, I would like to draw your attention to Clause 4, Section B, the Morality and Ethical Standards provision. This clause states that any conduct by the primary renter that involves illegal activity, fraud, or conspiracy to commit financial deception results in an immediate nullification of the contract. Dante stepped forward, his hands shaking as he tried to grab the microphone. "You cannot do this," he hissed, his voice cracking. "We have a contract. We paid the deposit." I looked at him with a pity that cut deeper than anger. I pulled the microphone back slightly. "Actually, Dante, you did not pay the deposit. You wired funds from a shell company that is currently under investigation for tax evasion. But even if you had paid in gold bars, the video we just watched is a confession to conspiracy to defraud the Banks family. That is a felony, and the manor does not host felons." I turned back to the crowd, my voice ringing out with absolute authority. "Therefore, effective immediately, this rental agreement is terminated for cause. This event is no longer a sanctioned gathering at the manor. It is an unauthorized assembly on private property. I am shutting it down. The kitchen has been instructed to cease service. The bar is closed. Security has been notified to escort all non-essential personnel from the premises within 30 minutes. A murmur of shock rippled through the room. The wealthy elite of Atlanta were not used to being evicted. They looked at their half-eaten appetizers and their full champagne glasses, realizing the party was over before it had even begun. I continued, my voice hardening. "Furthermore, because this breach of contract occurred in such a public manner, damaging the pristine reputation of this historic estate by associating it with attempted fraud, I am invoking the reputational damage clause. Mr. Dante, you are now liable for the full cost of the event, plus a penalty fee of 300%. You will be receiving an invoice for $150,000 by the end of the business day." Dante looked as if he had been punched in the gut. $150,000, he gasped. "I do not have that kind of money." "You know I do not." I smiled a cold professional smile. "I know. But your investors do." I looked out at the room, at the men and women Dante had tried to swindle. "I suggest you start explaining to them why you wasted their time and why they should not call the district attorney. You wanted to be a businessman, Dante. This is business. When you break a contract, there are penalties, and today I am collecting." The room remained silent for a heartbeat before the investors began to stand up, buttoning their jackets and checking their watches, distancing themselves from the sinking ship that was Dante. I had not just canceled a wedding, I had destroyed his credit rating, his reputation, and his future in less than 5 minutes. Judith Sterling stepped forward, taking the space I vacated at the microphone, her heels clicking with the precision of a metronome, counting down to an explosion. She placed the thick leather briefcase on the podium, opening it with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the hushed room. She pulled out a stack of blue-bound documents and adjusted her glasses, looking over the rim at Dante, who was now clutching the edge of the altar for support. "Mr. Dante," Judith began, her voice projecting with the cool detachment of an executioner. "We have discussed the wedding venue, but now we must address the matter of your business empire. You have spent the last 3 years telling everyone in this room that you are the founder and CEO of Dante Innovations, a cutting-edge tech firm on the verge of a breakthrough. You claim to be funded by a mysterious, high-profile angel investor from Silicon Valley, a silent partner who believed in your genius so much they gave you unlimited capital with zero oversight. Dante wiped sweat from his eyes, nodding frantically, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "That is right," he stammered, addressing the confused crowd. "I have backing. Big backing. My investor is going to hear about this, Simone. They will sue you for disrupting my business operations. They believe in me." Judith smiled a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Actually, Dante, they do not believe in you. They never did." She held up a document displaying a complex chart of corporate structures. "We performed a full audit of your company filings. It turns out Dante Innovations is nothing more than a shell company. It has no patents, no products, and no revenue. The only money entering the corporate account came from a single source, an entity listed as Archangel Ventures LLC." Dante pointed a shaking finger at her. "Exactly, Archangel Ventures. That is my Silicon Valley connection. They have millions." Judith shook her head slowly. "Archangel Ventures is not from Silicon Valley, Dante. It is a holding company registered right here in Atlanta. And if you look at the articles of incorporation, which I have right here, you will see the name of the sole managing member." She turned the document around so the entire room could see the bold text at the bottom. The name was Simone. The gasp that went through the room was audible. Dante stared at the paper, his brain short-circuiting. "No," he whispered. "That is impossible. I pitched to them. I sent emails. I had video calls with a voice modifier." Simone was sitting right next to me when I got the funding approval. I stepped back up to the mic, leaning in close. "I was sitting next to you, Dante, because I was the one approving the transfers. Every time you needed money for a prototype that never got built, or a business trip that turned out to be a vacation, I approved it. I funded your delusions. I paid for your office space, your staff, and your lifestyle under the guise of an angel investor, because I wanted to see if you would ever actually build something or if you would just burn through cash. You chose to burn it." Judith took over again, her voice hardening. "And as the primary and sole investor, Ms. Simone is exercising her right under the investment agreement to issue a capital call. She is withdrawing all funding effective immediately due to gross mismanagement and fraud. Furthermore, we have filed an injunction to freeze all company assets to recoup the losses. That means the corporate accounts are locked. The leased equipment is being repossessed. Even the tuxedo you are wearing, which you charged to the company card as a uniform expense, is technically now the property of the liquidators. You are not a CEO, Dante. You are an unemployed man standing in a suit you do not own at a wedding you cannot pay for. The audit is closed, and you are bankrupt." The silence in the ballroom did not last long. It was broken by the sharp scrape of chairs against the hardwood floor as the most powerful people in Atlanta decided they had seen enough. The exodus was immediate and brutal. Mr. Johnson, the real estate mogul who Dante had been trying to impress all afternoon, buttoned his suit jacket with a look of absolute disgust. He walked past the altar, not even looking at Dante, speaking only to the air. "You are a fraud, son. Do not ever mention my name or my company again, or my lawyers will destroy what little you have left." Dante watched them go, his eyes wide with panic. The bankers, the investors, the socialites, they were all turning their backs on him, streaming toward the exits like water draining from a sink. He realized his life was walking out the door. He scrambled toward the edge of the stage, stumbling over his own feet. "Wait, please come back!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "It is a misunderstanding. She is lying. I have the patents. I have the vision. Just give me 5 minutes to explain." Nobody stopped. Nobody turned around. Desperate, Dante turned back to me. He looked at my face, impassive and cold, and he realized I was the only one holding the keys to his survival. He did something I never thought I would see Dante do. He dropped to his knees right there on the marble steps of the altar. He clasped his hands together, begging like a child. "Simone, please." He sobbed, tears streaming down his face, ruining his makeup. "Don't do this. You have made your point. I am sorry, okay? I am sorry I hurt you. But do not ruin me. Unfreeze the accounts. Tell them it was a joke. I will do whatever you want. I will be your assistant. I will work for free. Just please do not leave me with nothing. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a distant pity. "You already have nothing, Dante," I said softly. "You just didn't know it until now." A sharp, manic laugh cut through Dante's sobbing. It came from Crystal. She was standing a few feet away, her body trembling with a rage so intense it looked painful. She looked at Dante kneeling on the floor, a broken, weeping man who had promised her the world and delivered nothing but humiliation. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had married a pauper. She had tied herself to a sinking ship. She looked at the ring on her finger, the symbol of her victory, and realized it was probably cubic zirconia charged to a company card that was now declined. "You are broke," she whispered, the word hanging in the air like a curse. "You are actually broke. You have no money, you have no company. No, you have nothing." Dante looked up at her, sniffling. "Crystal, baby, I can fix it. We can rebuild." She moved faster than I expected. She stepped forward and swung her hand with all her strength. The sound of her palm connecting with his cheek echoed through the cavernous room, loud enough to make the remaining guests flinch. Dante's head snapped to the side. "You liar," Crystal screamed, her voice raw. "You wasted my time. You humiliated me in front of my parents. You called me trash. Well, look at you now. You are the trash." She grabbed the neckline of her custom lace gown, the dress that had cost $24,000 of stolen money. With a primal scream of frustration, she yanked the fabric. The delicate lace tore with a sickening ripping sound. She clawed at the dress, tearing the bodice away from the skirt, destroying the symbol of their sham marriage. "I am done!" she shrieked, throwing the pieces of lace at his face. "I am not your wife. I am annulled. Do you hear me? I am erasing you." She spun around and marched down the aisle past her stunned parents, leaving Dante kneeling in a pile of torn lace and broken promises, alone in the ruin of his own making. The chaos in the ballroom had barely settled when the heavy oak doors swung open once more. This time it was not a scorned woman or a vengeful landlord who entered, but a squad of 6 officers wearing jackets emblazoned with the words "Economic Crimes Unit." They moved with a grim efficiency that silenced the remaining whispers in the room. They did not look at the guests or the ruined wedding decor. They walked straight toward the altar, where Dante was still kneeling in the wreckage of his life. Dante looked up, his eyes red and swollen, expecting perhaps a security guard coming to escort him out. Instead, he found himself looking down the barrel of a warrant. Dante Verna, the lead officer, announced, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "You are under arrest for credit card fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Dante scrambled to his feet, panic making his movements jerky. "What is this?" he stammered, backing away until he hit the podium. "This is a mistake. I have not done anything. Who called you? This is a civil matter. I am resolving it." A voice cut through his protests, sharp and familiar. "It is not a civil matter, Dante. It is a federal one." Becky stepped out from behind a pillar near the entrance where she had been hiding since the video played. She was holding her phone, her face streaked with mascara, but her expression hard. She pointed a shaking finger at her brother-in-law. "He did it," she told the officer, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and self-preservation. "He stole the identity of his investors. He opened those credit cards in my name without my permission. I have the emails proving he forged my signature." Dante stared at her, his mouth hanging open in betrayal. "Becky," he whispered, "you were in on it. We planned this together. You wrote the script." Becky shook her head, stepping back as the officers grabbed Dante's arms. "I do not know what you are talking about," she lied smoothly, desperate to save herself from the sinking ship. "I am a victim here too. I just wanted to help my family, but I did not know you were a criminal. Take him away." The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the final nail in Dante's coffin. He screamed as they dragged him down the aisle, kicking and pleading, but no one moved to help him. The investors he had tried to swindle watched with grim satisfaction as the man who promised them the moon was hauled away in shackles. While Dante was being shoved into the back of a squad car, a different drama was unfolding in the front row. Verna tried to slip away during the commotion, clutching her purse to her chest, hoping to disappear into the crowd. But Mr. Banks was faster. He blocked her path, his large frame casting a shadow over her terrified figure. He was not the polite country club father anymore. He was a businessman who had been insulted and robbed. "Where do you think you are going, Verna?" He growled, his face inches from hers. "You called us trash. You called us ATMs. Well, this ATM is closed. I want my money back. I want the $24,000 for that dress. I want the $50,000 deposit for the catering. I want every single dime you scammed out of my family." Verna backed up, her heels catching on the carpet. "Arthur, please." She whimpered, her arrogance completely replaced by fear. "I do not have it on me. It is in the bank. I will write you a check." Mrs. Banks stepped up beside her husband, her eyes cold. "We know you do not have it, Verna. We saw the audit. You are broke. You are going to sell that house, you are going to sell your jewelry, and you are going to pay us back, or I will personally make sure you share a cell with your son." The walls were closing in on Verna. The shame, the debt, the public humiliation, and the terrifying realization that her life of luxury was over was too much for her fragile constitution to handle. Her face turned a ghostly shade of white. Her hand fluttered to her chest. "Oh, my heart," she gasped, her eyes rolling back in her head. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the floor in a heap of purple silk and fake pearls. It was a theatrical faint, but the fear behind it was very real. She lay there on the cold floor of the manor, surrounded by the enemies she had made, hoping that when she woke up, this nightmare would be over, but knowing deep down that it was only just beginning. The drive home from the manor was the longest silence of Becky's life. Trey did not say a word, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Becky sat in the passenger seat, trying to formulate a lie that could salvage the wreckage of her marriage. She opened her mouth to speak, to blame Dante, to claim the video was a deepfake, but Trey just turned up the radio, drowning her out with the sound of static. When they pulled into the driveway of the modest suburban home she had always complained was too small, Trey did not turn off the engine. He got out, walked around to her side and opened the door. "Get out," he said, his voice flat and unrecognizable. Becky stepped out, her heels clicking on the pavement. "Baby, please let me explain." She started reaching for his arm. "You know how Verna gets. I was just agreeing with her to keep the peace. I didn't mean any of it. I love you, Trey. You are my husband." Trey stepped back as if her touch burned him. He looked at her with a mixture of heartbreak and cold clarity. "I watched that video, Becky. I watched you laugh while my brother called me a loser. I heard you tell him that I was just a placeholder until you could find a rich athlete. You called me boring. You called me a dead end." He walked past her into the house and she followed him, panic rising in her chest. He did not scream or throw things. He moved with a terrifying calm, going straight to the bedroom and pulling her suitcases from the top shelf of the closet. He began sweeping her clothes off the hangers, armfuls of dresses and tops, landing in the bags in a heap. "Trey, stop it!" Becky shrieked, grabbing at the clothes. "What are you doing? You cannot kick me out. This is my house too." Trey stopped and looked at her. "Actually, it is not. My name is on the deed. My name is on the mortgage. You made sure of that, remember? You said you didn't want your credit score affected by my debt. Well, congratulations, Becky. You are debt-free and home-free. I want you out, tonight. I will have the rest of your things sent to your mother's house. I am filing for divorce in the morning." He zipped the bag shut and dragged it to the front door, tossing it onto the porch. Becky stood there, tears streaming down her face, realizing her safety net was gone. Trey looked at her one last time, his eyes filled with tears he refused to shed. "I worked double shifts for you," he whispered. "I bought you that car. I tried to give you everything, and you laughed at me behind my back. Go find that upgrade you wanted, Becky, because you are done here." He slammed the door, and the sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed like a gunshot. Becky stood alone on the dark porch, her luggage surrounding her like tombstones. She sat down on her suitcase, shaking with shock, and pulled out her phone, needing validation, needing her followers to tell her she was the victim. She opened Instagram expecting sympathy, but what she found was a digital execution. The video of her turning on Dante had gone viral, but not in the way she hoped. The internet did not see a victim, they saw a snake. Her notifications were a blur of hate. Thousands of comments flooded her posts. "You threw your own family under the bus," one user wrote. "You are worse than Dante. At least he was loyal to his own greed," another commented. Her inbox was full of messages from the few brands she worked with. The hair vitamin company sent a generic email terminating her contract effective immediately, citing a violation of their community values clause. The boutique she promoted sent a DM asking her to remove their tag from her bio. She was being cancelled in real time. The social status she had clawed so hard to build was evaporating into the night air. She had no husband, no home, no money, and now she had no audience. Becky dropped her phone on the concrete and put her head in her hands, weeping not for the husband she lost, but for the follower count that was dropping by the second. The sunset over Atlanta was a different color when viewed from the 45th floor of the Legacy Holdings Tower. Down on the street, the city was loud and chaotic, a mess of traffic and noise, but up here, behind the soundproof glass, it was a silent painting of gold and violet. 30 days had passed since the wedding that never was. 30 days since the police cars flashed their lights at the manor, and the house of cards Dante built finally collapsed. The gossip blogs had moved on to the next scandal, and the comments on my social media had shifted from hate to admiration, but I did not care about the noise anymore. I did not feel the surge of vindictive joy that everyone expected me to feel. I did not toast to Dante's arraignment or Verna's bankruptcy filing. I just felt a profound quiet settle over my life. It was the peace of a room that has finally been cleaned of all the clutter, the feeling of being able to breathe without a weight pressing down on my chest. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. It was a massive slab of reclaimed wood, covered in neat stacks of contracts and blueprints. In the center lay a single document waiting for my signature. It was not a lawsuit or an eviction notice. It was a grant proposal. I picked up my pen, the weight of it familiar and grounding, and signed my name at the bottom. It was a check for $500,000 gifted to the Eastside Public Library. The same library where I had spent years reading quietly in the back corner, the place Verna had mocked as my lowly workplace, was now getting a new technology wing funded by the very fortune she tried to steal. It was not charity, it was gratitude. That library had given me a sanctuary when I needed to hide, and now I was giving it a future. There was a soft knock on the heavy glass door. It was not the frantic pounding of a man needing money, or the sharp rap of a lawyer serving papers. It was a rhythmic, respectful sound. "Come in," I said, my voice soft but filling the room. Julian walked in. He was a managing partner from a firm in Chicago. We had just acquired a man who built skyscrapers with the same precision I used to build my portfolio. He was tall, with a quiet confidence that did not need to scream to be heard. He stopped a few feet from the desk, waiting for me to finish organizing my papers. "The car is downstairs, Simone," he said, his voice deep and warm. "The reservation at Bacchanalia is for 8 o'clock. But if you need more time with the quarterlies, we can push it back. I am in no rush." I looked at him, assessing the difference between a boy who demands your time and a man who respects it. Dante would have been honking the horn outside, complaining that I was making him late for a party. Julian just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at me like I was the only interesting thing in the skyline. I capped my pen and placed it in the holder. "The work is done," I said, offering him a small, genuine smile. "The quarterlies are excellent and the library grant is official." I picked up my clutch from the desk. It was just a bag tonight, not a shield, not a weapon. I walked around the desk and Julian stepped aside, holding the door open for me, not as a performance of chivalry, but as a simple act of courtesy. We walked toward the elevator, the silence between us comfortable and easy. As the metal doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the empire I had defended, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. I did not see a victim. I did not see a vengeful ex-girlfriend. I saw a woman who had walked through the fire and came out made of gold. I was not looking back at the wreckage I left behind. I was looking forward to the dinner, to the conversation, and to a life that finally belonged entirely to me. The elevator began its smooth descent, carrying me down to the city that was no longer a battlefield, but a playground. I was free. This story reveals that true power never needs to scream. Dante built a castle on sand, believing that loud displays of wealth could mask his moral bankruptcy. He mistook Simone's calculated silence for weakness, not realizing she was documenting every lie. The ultimate lesson here is that integrity is the only currency that matters, and no amount of designer clothes can hide a poverty of character. Real success is built on truth, while a house of cards will always inevitably fall. Never underestimate the quiet ones, because they are usually the ones holding the keys. Subscribe now if you agree that success is the best revenge.